Hello and welcome to the All of God's Daughters channel. This is episode 10 in the Preparing for Marriage series. I'll be starting with a short series based on the book Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts by Dr. Les and Leslie Parrott. Also, I would like to apologize if my voice sounds a little strange. I've been battling with a cold. They talk about the 4 myths of marriage. And if you read a bit before they start discussing the 4 myths, they talk about people who admit to having marital problems as little as 9 months after their wedding, and they believe that a lot of marital problems can be addressed by talking about these 4 myths and debunking them. The 4 myths then is: we expect exactly the same things from marriage. Everything good in our relationship will get better. Everything bad in my life will disappear. My spouse will make me whole. And for this episode, I'm just going to do the first one. We expect exactly the same thing from marriage. I quote, "What we anticipate seldom occurs. What we least expect generally happens, especially in marriage." And in the book, they talk about conscious and unconscious expectations. And they talk about having a clear image of what life will be like together, and how both spouses, before they get married, form this ideal in their heads of how marriage will look or how the married life will look. And it's not necessarily the same, but for some reason we assume that our spouse also formed the same mental image that we did. And they also mention here how people fantasize about married life for many years before they get married. So you get a lot of expectations that will either be met or not met in marriage. And in the first year of marriage, you will start noticing these differences in expectations, and also start realizing maybe that you are reacting based on your expectations not being met, or maybe your spouse will have a reaction because his expectations are not met. So I would like to give my own opinion here. I think it's important for us to not marry with the idea that it is for our happiness and that it is the one thing in life that we are missing. If only we get married, everything will get better. And that is the third myth: everything bad in my life will disappear. But I think that something we can expect from marriage is for us to be willing to serve our husbands. And that can help us quite a lot when we start realizing that we have unmet expectations, or that maybe our husband has unmet expectations, for us to be willing to serve and not to always fight for our rights. But I also would like to mention here that we are talking about a non-abusive relationship. They also mention here that most incongruous expectations fall into 2 major categories: unspoken rules and unconscious roles. Unspoken rules. I quote, "Everyone lives by a set of rules that is rarely spoken but always known. Needless to say, unspoken rules become more vocal when our spouse breaks them." For example, they talk about their own marriage, where Les expected a slower, easier pace during the holidays, but Leslie's family didn't have that type of culture, and that caused conflict because she had this expectation that the holidays are slow-paced and more relaxed. And then that leads to frustration because the other person now doesn't live by the same rules. And it is important for us when we get married to discuss our secret expectations and to make our silent rules known. And a few examples they have here is: don't interrupt another's work, always buy organic fruits and vegetables, don't ask for help unless you are desperate, downplay your success, and the list goes on. And then they talk about your personal 10 commandments, and they give you a little assignment to write down your personal 10 commandments, the unspoken rules that you live by. So they give you a challenge to make these unspoken rules spoken. And before I go on to the unconscious roles, I would like to talk about in marriage what you do with these unspoken rules, because some of your rules just won't be able to stand. You will perhaps have to adapt, change, maybe compromise a bit, or let some of them go if maybe they're unreasonable or they don't fit into your current lifestyle, or they cause a lot of discomfort or frustration. And there are some hard truths that we can think about. And for one, some of our unspoken rules are very opinionated. So when it comes to sin, we can stand a bit more firmly on these rules because they are God's rules. They are not our own. But when it comes to things like at what time you sweep the house or where you do your groceries, this is something that you and your husband will start building together. You are starting a new life together and you will be compiling new unspoken rules as a family. And as Christians, we must remember who the man of the house is. And it's not about being abused or willfully allowing your husband to neglect or mistreat you. Once again, as I always say, choose well and choose carefully. Don't rush into marriage. Make sure that you will choose a man that treats you well. Sometimes we have to accept the fact that God made the husband the head of the house, and if you are fighting about these unspoken rules and maybe your husband has some new regulations for the home that your father never had, you are now under your husband's roof. You are living with him as the head of the home from a Christian perspective, and perhaps it is time to let go of some of your childhood rules or some of the rules that you made up when maybe you were living alone, and allowing your husband to lead the family and for him to make new rules and regulations. And of course, it is something that you build on together, so it's not a tyrannical type of relationship that your husband has towards you, but it's a team effort wherein you are willing to submit when called for. But this means a lot of self-denial and change without self-loss. What I mean by this is, once again, it's not an abusive type of relationship, and we shouldn't always just think of this process happening in a case of abuse. This can happen in a perfectly normal, healthy, and happy relationship where we just see the role of husband and wife playing out as it was supposed to play out, where you have a leader and you have a follower. And most organizations, most well-run companies have the same type of structure, so I don't see any problems with this healthy type of relationship where the husband is looking after his wife's best will and trying to set up rules and regulations that will work for the family. Then unconscious roles. I quote, "The second source of mismatched expectations involves the unconscious roles that you and your partner fall into. And this can come from personal disposition, family backgrounds, and marital expectations. And many times we will look to the other person to operate in the role that we think they should operate in. And many times we see these roles, or many times we expect these roles because we saw them in the families that we came from, or maybe we didn't see them. So maybe you didn't have a father who was very active, so you don't necessarily expect your husband to be very active in the financial affairs of the family. They give a list here where they just give a few examples. You have the planner, the shopper, the secret keeper, the comedian, the cleaner, the gift buyer, the cook, the money manager, and the navigator. And then they say that many times we follow a script that was written by our role models when we grew up. But our challenge when we marry is to write a new script. And from a biblical perspective, it is the woman's role to adapt. Now, of course, the husband will also need to change, and if he is any sort of a godly husband, he will act from a place of love, concern, and just genuine interest in the well-being of his wife. So he's not trying to lift himself by breaking his wife. He is trying to build her up and trying his best to work together on figuring out how you will fulfill the different roles that are necessary in a family. And perhaps you are a better planner or a better shopper than your husband. Maybe he is a better comedian or a better navigator. And maybe the roles were switched around with your parents. Maybe you grew up in a single parent house. So it's important to be willing to let that frame of reference go and to build a new one. Together, you and your husband will build the new normal. And you are like a ghostwriter or a co-author. But we must remember that in Ephesians 5, women are called to submit under the leadership of their husbands. And once again, this can happen in a normal, healthy marriage. And they give us the same type of exercise for making these rules conscious. And if you are maybe already in a relationship, it can be easier for you to kind of figure out what role your future spouse will play. Maybe you are still single and you know your own strengths, and you can start thinking about what you expect from your husband regarding his roles and what you expect from yourself. Now, these expectations that you bring into your marriage can make or break your marriage. So I like giving the advice of not holding on too tightly to these rules and roles. You can see them now, like how you think of them, how you imagine them to be one day. You can look at them as very temporary. It's like a child in school who have never been in a real job or in a real working environment. They can only imagine how it is, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it's a good thing to think about marriage, to imagine how it will work. But we must know that the rules that we come up with now, the expectations, the unspoken rules that we form for life will be something that's subject to change the moment we marry. And if we hold on too tightly, then it can cause a lot of pain and frustration later on, because we won't be able to adapt and to change and to submit to our husbands. So that is all that I have for today, and in the next episode we will be talking about myth 2. Everything good in our relationship will get better. If this video was helpful, please click the like button.
Smash that like button.